Hi, welcome to Dead Honest. I'm your guide in grief, Hannah, and today I want to talk to you about one of my favourite symbols, the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper has gone through one of the most dramatic symbolic evolutions of any death figure in Western culture. You're probably like, what do you mean, any death figure in Western culture? Trust me, there's loads. We'll get to them later. So, in the Middle Ages, the Grim Reaper was a literal, terrifying reminder of mass mortality. I say that with a grin, that worries me deeply. Today, he is a much more flexible character who can be frightening, funny, sympathetic, or even heroic, depending on the story. So, I want to walk through a little bit of that evolution and how society's relationship with the Reaper has changed. So, medieval Europe. Uh, we are in a world of plague, famine, war, and extremely high mortality. Death was an unstoppable force, and it was symbolized by the Reaper. So the Reaper represented mass death, especially during the Black Death, divine judgment, so death was seen as God's punishment, memento mori, the wonderful adage of remember you will die, and society everyone in society is equal in death. Kings and peasants alike will fall to the scythe. So the visual traits of the early Grim Reaper were a skeleton, physical reality of decay, a scythe for the harvesting of human lives like crops, and a hooded cloak which served as anonymity and also had a few monastic associations. Death was often seen with an hourglass, often seen as that countdown of life and that inevitability that those sands of time will run out for each and every one of us. Death in the Middle Ages wasn't abstract. It was everywhere, and the Reaper embodied that brutal truth fully. So then we moved on to the Renaissance, to Enlightenment, and death became a moral and philosophical symbol. So now people have got changing religious attitudes. We're thinking more about humanism, and philosophy is more and more prevalent. Death, death's meaning by the Grim Reaper is seen as a universal truth and an established fact that it is going to happen, not just a punishment. So the shifts in symbolism here, more emphasis on time, fate, and the natural order of things, less emphasis on divine wrath, and death becomes a philosophical companion, not just a monster. The Reaper became a reminder to live virtuously, wisely, and humbly, because after all, he was coming for us all. Then, in the 19th century, Romanticism stepped in, and everything became romantic. Therefore, we encounter the gentle death. So, death was then seen more in romantic literature, in spiritualism, and in the changing views that people had on the afterlife. So, death became a bit of a release or a transition rather than just boom. Well, I suppose even previously, we supposedly had heaven. There's a whole load of thing about how you get into heaven. That's another video. Death became a release or a transition. So these new tones appear in the depictions of the Grim Reaper. Death becomes mysterious, even beautiful. The Reaper appears as a guide rather than a threat, and art and poetry portray death as peaceful or inevitable but never cruel or rarely cruel. So this era completely softened the Reaper's edges. And then the 20th century happened, and the Reaper became a fully formed character. We then started seeing images of the Grim Reaper in films, in cartoons, and mass media, and death became a narrative device. Some of my favourite books, even children's books, have death as a character, and the compassion and understanding that version of the Grim Reaper shows is absolutely amazing. I will put links down below for where you can buy some of them. So I know that Death the Duck and the Tulip is one of them, and so is Cry Heart But Never Break. That book is soul destroying in the most beautiful way. So, anyway, we're in the 20th century and the Reaper is a character. So, the Reaper has gained a personality, sometimes stern, sometimes humorous, often just very, very gentle, often silent. Um, Kind of makes me think of, even though it's not a completely similar thing, the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come in The Muppet Christmas Carol, the all time greatest adaptation of A Christmas Carol, where it's just a hood and a finger, and that's it. And he's terrifying, but he's not doing anything that should be scary. He's just pointing, he is just leading the way. It's just that we don't want to go there. So the Reaper's got a personality and then starts to appear in cartoons and sometimes as a comedic figure, somebody that we need to foil, to trick, um, and then becomes a stock character in stories about fate and morality. So the Reaper becomes familiar and potentially approachable. And then we've even got the, don't know if I do want to talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it. Them books about a wizard, um, where the idea of trying to cheat death. And the thing I love most about all of that is the idea of, right at the very end, the one that has the magic cloak greets death as an old friend. That's how we should be approaching it now that we've got away from the Reaper being super, super scary. So then, in the late 20th century to today, the Grim Reaper has become even more flexible, a multi genre icon. So, pop culture, secularization, shifting attitudes towards death, people like me that are death positive, and death has now become someone we can negotiate with. Which I'm sure that the old portrayals of death are like shaking their sides at, like, how dare we? But we have modern portrayals with such a vast range. So death in the Family Guy, in the Family Guy, who does that? Death in Family Guy is hilarious. He's relatable. He wears, is it flip flops? I don't know. He wears sandals. He goes on holiday. Um, he becomes sympathetic, like in Terry Pratchett's Discworld. He can become romantic or tragic, then become bureaucratic. So we had things like Dead Like Me and in The Sandman, where death is just, to be fair, some of my favourite lines of literature are, you get what anyone gets, you get a lifetime. And that was from the Death series. And then even in some fantasy and young adult fiction, you get death as a heroic and a protective figure. So the Reaper now symbolizes transition over terror, neutrality. They're not evil, they're just doing a job. It could have come to any of us. Some of us are funeral celebrants. I don't encourage people to die. It's just what happens. The humanization of death. We have added layers of flesh and character to those bones that we saw in the beginning. And we've made him, I keep saying him, possibly because he's always really tall, much less frightening. And the Reaper is now a mirror. So every story that is generally told, the Grim Reaper in it, is about exploring what life means to us. The modern Reaper is less about fear and is much more about storytelling. So, to recap, our Grim Reaper has evolved from medieval horror to Renaissance morals to romantic mystery and now a modern character fully fleshed out. Excuse the pun. And is one of the most adaptable figures in global pop culture, a canvas for our changing attitudes towards morality. I personally absolutely love the symbolism of the Reaper, the scythe, the cloak, the skeleton features. I actually have a absolutely horrendous, probably came from a pound shop, scythe, and I cannot wait to get my craft on for this thing. I am going to make it look beautiful. So there are other differentiations between the Reaper and other people that are very similar. So I'm going to talk about that in the next one. And yes, there will be more death deities, many, many more. See you soon.